Welcome to another episode of Stories from the Edge of Life. We have once again Dr. Charles von Gunten. Dr. von Gunten, welcome back.
Thank you, Parag.
Dr. von Gunten, would you mind introducing yourself once again to our audience?
My name is Charles von Gunten. I'm professor of medicine and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Palliative Medicine.
Great. And I'm Parag Bharadwaj. I'm a hospice and palliative medicine physician in the US. I trained under Dr. Charles von Gunten at a fabulous institution called San Diego Hospice and Institute of Palliative Medicine. And that is the organization that we're going to talk about today. So, Dr. von Gunten, you were my program director when I started off as a fellow at San Diego Hospice. You, of course, had other roles after I finished my training there, which was a year long. Would you describe your role at San Diego Hospice? Just the titles that you had, and then we'll go about talking about other things about the organization.
Well, I like most places or most careers, one's titles change as one grows and develops something. I was recruited to San Diego Hospice to build its education and research programs. And as part of that, creating a fellowship program. So I was fellowship program director for that initially. And then we developed a research program and education for first physicians, medical students, residents, ended up being for 7 institutions in the city. And we formed the Institute for Palliative Medicine because in academia, an institute is a place that crosses the boundaries of institutions, crosses schools, crosses universities and colleges for a specific purpose. So the Institute for Palliative Medicine, and I was the provost, which is an old title that means the chief academic officer. And as such, then I was a vice president of the organization.
Thank you, Dr. von Gunten. I will share my perspectives as to why I thought the organization was very unique. I mean, of course, I was there just for a year. Would you mind sharing your perspective as to what made San Diego Hospice, an Institute for Palliative Medicine, unique and special?
I agree with you. It was unique and special, as any specialist organization's special place can be. What made it special was a number of things coming together. It had a vision for what it could be because it was independent, freestanding, incorporated. It looked only to itself rather than a larger organization for its meaning. It had, before I was there, it had been a community hospice for more than 20 years and had its ups and downs, but it had a visionary medical director, Dr. Laurel Herbst. But it was only when the board of directors recruited Jan Chetty to be its chief executive officer. She was a nurse leader who had a successful career of building large, successful programs in standard healthcare. And so she came, she had no background in end-of-life care or hospice care, but she knew how to build programs. And it was that combination of physician who, Laurel Herbst, knew the kind of care she wanted to give patients, and Jan Chetty knew how to lead an organization and was behind the vision, but could help make it happen. And between the two of them, they wanted to be the best in the world. And Jan Chetty, in her formula for building programs, whether it was on orthopedics or neurosurgery, was to find the best physician talent and give that physician talent the resources the physicians needed to achieve their goals. And so I was recruited as part of that. She had identified, by hearing me speak, I think in Washington initially, and recruited because I had background in clinical care, but particularly in education and research. And they wanted to make a difference, not just in San Diego, but across the country and around the world. And I, I could enroll in that vision. Jan used that language. I want you to enroll in the vision. What do we need to achieve this? And then, so having a vision, having the right leadership, and then you have to have the finances to make that happen. And San Diego Hospice, in contrast to many places, had a number of people that were philanthropists, but the most important to it, in some ways, important was an Achilles heel in some ways, was Joan Kroc. Joan Kroc was the widow of Ray Kroc, who founded and ran McDonald's. Joan's father was taken care of by a hospice in Wisconsin, and she had experienced that as terrific. So, wealthy woman living in the San Diego area, wanted to make a difference. And when she wanted to give money to the university to do this, the university said no. And so she found this little community hospice and said, I want to give you this money to be great. And Laurel Herbst and Jan Chetty said yes. And so a single gift built the 24-bed inpatient unit, furnished it, made it, and it was dedicated to be world-class, and it was licensed not as a hospice, but as a hospital, with the idea that it would be attractive for physicians to learn and to practice there and to be a resource. And of course, Joan Kroc then had other friends and philanthropists in the region who were all, if Joan's on board with this, we're on board with this. And Jan Chetty brought one last piece, which is her main objective in leading the hospice was to help people find the front door, to reduce barriers to access, to make it easy for patients to get the care they needed. So I think those three things, which mirror the widely read management book, Good to Great, you need to know what you're best in the world at. You need to know what your financial engine is. And you need to have the right people on board. When all those three things come together, you can do something great. And that is what happened at San Diego Hospice and the Institute for Palliative Medicine. All those three things came together. And arguably, and by its reputation, was the best in the world at taking care of patients, teaching doctors and others. In the end, we had 4,000 learners per year through the Institute for Palliative Medicine learning and doing research that changed practice. It was a great vision and we achieved a lot.
Yes, indeed. And you use the word great, and I'll just say it as a recipient of the education, I think it was magical. It was a lot more than great. I'll just share my insights, Dr. Von Gunten, when I was training in geriatrics. My conversation with my program director in terms of the next steps in my career was that I want to get trained in the field of hospice and palliative medicine, and I wanted to pursue the training in the best organization in the US. And his answer to me was, it's San Diego Hospice. And that's where I interviewed for the program and luckily got selected and spent a year. And as a clinician, I will tell you, when I had seen a lot of suffering of patients, that's what pushed me or pulled me into the field. And one of the things that was startling to me, because when I had undergone training in other places, was that the notion of hospice was just was to prescribe opioids and benzodiazepine, namely medications like morphine and Ativan and so forth. And it opened a world of information for me in terms of what good clinical practice should be like. And it goes back to, I think, what I constantly heard from the leadership when I was there was, we want to change the way medicine is being practiced.
Mhm.
And I saw it happen.
Mhm.
Because when I came with a preconceived notion that it's going to be just about providing care to patients and alleviating their suffering in the last few hours or perhaps the last few days, where I walked in and then patients were getting chemotherapy on hospice, patients were on ventilators on hospice, patients were getting very aggressive treatments for complications from the diseases, and also I was taking care of patients with sepsis. It was very cutting edge medicine combining with uh, overlapping with hospice care, which for the most part were sort of the way we were trained were mutually exclusive. And we were taught like, no, good patient care actually involves talking to the patient and focusing on what their goal is and trying to achieve their goal. And that's what drove the interventions, the medical interventions. So that in a nutshell is what I experienced. And you, of course, taught a lot more physicians over the years. I believe when I was there, it was perhaps the largest fellowship program in the country. There were, if I recall, 11 of us in that fellowship year. So could you share a little bit more insights in terms of, from a clinical perspective, what made it so unique from your experience prior to joining San Diego Hospice and after you were there, and some of the unique things that were offered to patients in that particular environment?
Well, I will enlarge on all the observations you made as a fellow there, because they are exactly what I'd want the take-home messages to be. So many people get caught with their mental models that they have associate with particular words. So Laurel Herbst and I and all the physicians, well, the whole leadership, were united about, this is about the best medical care of patients, the best medicine. And that is determined by who is the patient and what is their condition and what can best be done to help them feel better. That's where it stopped. There is, in the US, the word hospice means not just what I just said, how to take the best care of patients who are close to the end of life, but it is a funding strategy and a set of regulations regulating those organizations that receive the funding. It's a mistake to think that the decisions of other organizations or what others have done are actually in the rules. We didn't do anything at San Diego Hospice that wasn't consistent with the rules for the Medicare hospice benefit. What we did do is make decisions that were different than many organizations because it was the right thing to do for this particular patient. And Jan Chetty felt very strongly that if you did the right thing for patients, the money would follow, the money would come. And so the decision for, you used the point of chemotherapy. There were patients that came to San Diego Hospice with advanced cancers who had never, ever had chemotherapy, never been offered it, never been exposed to it. And the best way to make pain and suffering from cancer better is to make the cancer better if you can. And even shrinking a little bit can make the pain go away, nausea go away. There's no rule against using chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is expensive, but if you're doing it for one patient, not everybody, and you're taking care of 1,000 patients on any given day, the amount of money you're spending is small. but the value to that patient can be great. The value to all the rest of your staff, that we're doing the right thing. We're not constrained by the finances. We're constrained by doing the right thing for patients. And all those physicians who are watching and know they're committed to best patient care. They're not like one of those places that is constantly watching the cost or constantly watching some other metric. They've got their eye on the most important thing, which is taking the best care of patients and their families. And that's where I want my patient. It multiplied. So the hospice under Jan's leadership went from taking care of on average of 200 patients per day to 1,000 patients per day. And since in the US, hospice care is paid per patient per day, the amount of resources grew. That commitment to not getting in the way of doctors, of doing the right thing for patients, was a bedrock principle of San Diego Hospice. And Laurel Herbst, as the chief medical officer, that's how she led. That's the direction we went. So it's a fundamental business principle, but understanding what all of the ramifications are for those decisions. But it required being confident, being bold, having courage, and trusting that the rest of the medical community would understand. And that's why San Diego Hospice, without advertising, ended up with 80% of the market share in the region because it was acknowledged as the best. And that same principle applied to being the best at teaching and being the best at doing research in the field.
Outstanding. The interesting thing about San Diego Hospice was, I mean, you described some of the guiding principles for the leadership and the organization, but it was just the physical facility itself. You know, when you went in, you realize that this is not just any other building that you're walking into. It was very unique. The way the people inside the building behaved and interact with each other was unique. What do you think brought about, that brought that unique culture to San Diego Hospice?
The inpatient unit was built, in response to Joan Kroc saying, yes, I'll give you the money to buy the land and build the building. And there was no budget. She said she'd pay the bill. So it started with her father having been cared for well and wanting this to be a place of international significance where others would come. So the idea that using architecture as a way to embody principles, that is throughout architecture. All architects enjoy having that kind of collaboration. So the architect that was engaged for that building did not have a history of building healthcare facilities or hospices. And in interviewing the leadership and being around the staff, tried to embody in the physical place what was the spirit of the place. One of the biggest surprises most people get when they either have a family member or a loved one in hospice care, or like you who come to teach there, they expect it to be depressing and sad, and instead they find laughter, joy, the best of humans working to provide the best of care, and that is uplifting. So that, you notice I'm using my, that what is uplifting? Well, so the building then was, the architecture was very steep, soaring roofs with huge amount of space in the lobby and each of the rooms, because no one wants to be enclosed in a space, particularly where the human spirit is very expansive. So it was placed on a point overlooking the ocean and the valley, with big rooms, large spaces for people to interact. A key decision was made, because you remember at the time that was built, most hospitals, there's the patients and then the staff, and nurses' stations were built like a kind of a cage to keep the patients out, keep the nurses and the doctors and others safe. The nurses' station was purposely built with no barriers, and it was a large desk where the doctors and the nurses, to do their work, had to sit on the outside, facing on the side where patients and families could be, and there was a large open area there to explicitly, so there'd be no barrier for someone to come up and put their hand on the shoulder, or come up and say, gee, can we talk? So embodying in the architecture the things that you're trying to achieve for patients and families and communicate the vision were built into that place. The chapel was built with that in mind. It wasn't denominational. But again, that soaring feeling, the stained glass window that helped bring your eyes up and your spirit up, or the gardens, the elaborate gardens around, so that it was a place of beauty and peace. And so it facilitated places to go. When someone is sick, even sick enough to be dying, and someone visits, they can't stay in the room all the time. There are people that need to pace, they need to walk. Well, you need to give them a place to go. So it was very purposeful. It was beautiful. It was meant to capture beauty, the beauty of looking out to the ocean, the beauty of looking out to the valley, the beauty of flowers. Most of the vegetation not only bloomed because it's in San Diego, but it had a perfume. So this large glass, because again, in San Diego, this indoor, outdoor, you don't have to have those barriers as in other parts of the country or the world where you have to have a defend against the elements. In San Diego, making the outdoors in is part of living in Southern California. So building that into the architecture was all part of the therapeutic environment. One of the things that wasn't just you, all the fellows who came, all the students who came, you remember you'd get a call about a patient was being admitted from a local hospital, terrible pain, nausea, vomiting, couldn't eat, horrible, horrible, horrible. They'd done everything they could, couldn't control it, coming by ambulance. And you'd be all ready. All right, what are we going to do? What are the drugs we're going to use? We're going to jump all over this. And the patient would come in, oh, I feel so much better for what's for lunch. Well, it was the environment. It was planned from the time that they came through those front gates, coming down. It was beautiful coming through it. There were no little hallways by design. It was open and expansive. Everything was warm colors, purples, reds, no dark blues, no more black, no gray, no stark white, carpeted, so that it was warm and warm colors, all in shades of red and rose. Well, the patients relaxed. And then when you relax, you feel better. And since it had a custom kitchen and we could make what patients wanted to eat in the sizes, so everything was focused and it was played out in the architecture. That's what made it special. But it was Joan Kroc who said, do something great and I'll pay for it. That was the part of that.
Great. Talking about the food, I will tell you, that's the only place I ever heard patients saying this is the best hospital. This is the hospital with the best food I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The other unique thing that I noticed when I was there was the focus and the willingness to allow for complementary therapies. There was a Reiki practitioner, there was a aromatherapist, there was a music therapist who would come in. I'm not sure why that is not part of mainstream medicine in other places. But whose vision was it to bring all those elements in?
I attribute that to Dr. Laurel Herbst. She was certainly one of the smartest physicians I've ever known. She was sharp about medicine, but she was also sharp about this: I will do what's best for my patients, without preconceived notions about what's standard and what's not. Um, the environment in Southern California is rich with people with alternative approaches to healthcare than just standard allopathic medicine. The commitment to good patient care and the outcome of that being the patient says he or she feels better, the family says they feel better, the staff say they feel better. That's the key outcome measure. And if aromatherapy, if music therapy, if traditional Oriental medicine can achieve that, well, then we'll offer it. So it's very clear about what the outcome and the measure of success of that is the patient and family say they feel better. None of it was pushed on patients, just like those patients who wouldn't take morphine or wouldn't take antibiotics. Not standard, but they are the arbiter of what the best outcome is, not us. That environment, and then the generosity of our donors, being able to make that, because all those people were paid. They're there as part of their professional duties. Each of those areas has their own training programs, their own knowledge base, willing to bring that together in one environment and allowing them to interact. That kind of, whoa, sense, because you came from arguably the best geriatrics program in the country, for you to say, this changes my sense of what I thought I knew. The best kind of education does that. You are challenged to think carefully and critically about what you know to bring in new information. It had that effect on me, but that generosity of spirit, not just towards patients, but towards the field, toward each other, toward building the knowledge base and doing what brings things together. And you saw, as I did, that there were miracles, changes that allopathic medicine couldn't change, but nausea under control, pain better control, somebody managed without sedatives to control anxiety or control delirium. Astounding, but how wonderful to have a laboratory for that, to have a place where you can experiment. That's what Joan Kroc wanted. That's what Laurel was committed to making happen. Jan Chetty wanted to lead that kind of place, and the donors wanted to put their money in a place that was doing that, because none of the other healthcare organizations in town were interested.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll tell you some of the experiences I had with alternative treatments. There was a patient who came in with edema, meaning swelling in the lower extremities. Nothing that we were providing to the patient in form of medicines was making a dent in the swelling. And somebody said, hey, did you try calling the acupuncturist that we consult? And the acupuncturist came, did her thing, and the next day, the swelling was gone. And there was another patient I remember, she was having hallucinations of spiders haunting her, visual hallucinations, and the aromatherapist, provided aromatherapy and left a bottle of lavender spray. And, she said she sprayed that on the spiders and the spiders didn't bother her anymore. Something that would have never happened in any other medical setting. Very simple, very effective, right? But that was what made San Diego Hospice very unique. So I'm hoping that through this interview, others who have experienced that the care in that institution, or have visited that institution, or have offered care to patients, would come forward and share their stories as well, because it was a very unique place. And just to break the suspense as to why we are referring to it in past tense, San Diego Hospice and Institute for Palliative Medicine is no longer in existence as a physical entity. Um, so, would you mind, before we conclude, shedding light on that aspect of its existence?
The most important thing to take away is that leadership matters. The leadership changed at San Diego Hospice and the Institute for Palliative Medicine. Jan Chetty had a serious illness, and although she recovered, then she retired. And the new chief executive had a different vision. No longer wanted it to be an academic institution, no longer wanted it to be a place for education, teaching, wanted it to be a community hospice and turn it back that way. So I was relieved of my duties and began turning. And then in addition to that, the Medicare, the chief funder questioned whether all patients that were admitted to the hospice were actually eligible. And the decision that this new leader made was not to fight it, but to agree that, well, yes, and they began discharging patients. And when the key pillars of an organization are leadership, vision, money, when two of those legs no longer stand, it crumbles. And that's what happened. It lost its way, and the finances quickly crumbled, and then they declared bankruptcy and dissolved.
Very sad indeed, Dr. Von Gunten. It's still hard to imagine that it's no longer there. But what the lesson I learned from this whole episode was that in life, you should never take things for granted. When I was there, it was such a budding institution, such a budding organization. And I never thought that the organization which I learned to care for very sick and dying patients would actually teach me such a great lesson from its own demise. Any parting thoughts from your perspective?
Like all tragedies, I think trying to take away what are the key lessons. And for me, the key lesson is about the importance of leadership. Certainly speaking in the US, among all physicians, there is a general attitude that, oh, just make the administration go away. Just let me take care of patients. Give me what I need, what I want to take care of patients, and get out of my way. Leadership matters. The chief executive matters. Vision matters. And if you don't have the right leader, if you get the wrong leader, everything can be lost in a very short amount of time. I've seen that play out in other places where I have worked. I think it's a generalizable principle. So I think for each of us, recognizing that leadership matters, our executives matter, and we want to work for and work with the right leaders in order to achieve our goals. That to me is the key take home that seems generalizable. And you, as somebody who was trained there, as we've trained so many people, they are the living legacy. You are the legacy of San Diego Hospice. People I've met who say, we're trying to make it present here. The principles we learned, we're trying to make present here. Joan Kroc, Laurel, you can't have anything better than that when the people you train go out and reproduce it wherever they go.
Thank you, Dr. Von Gunten. Right, so it's interesting you stress so much on leadership, and I remember when I was a fellow there, you used to say how much leadership matters. And at that point, I used to wonder, what is this whole fuss about leadership? I just want to learn how to take care of patients, and and that's when I was like, hey, San Diego Hospice is such a big name, not only nationally, internationally. That thought would never even crossed my mind that one day there would be a possibility that it's no longer there. But this is the reality of today's world, right? So I just want to thank you for all you have done over your career, and for other folks at San Diego Hospice while you were there. And you're right, it is a legacy that should carry on, and we'll try to capture as much as we can online so that it continues to inspire others who are trying to pursue implementing the best care possible for their patients.
Well, you're a great example of the legacy. You've played significant leadership roles in integrated health systems across the United States. And there are others like you who have done that, not just in the US, but around the world. So for me personally, that's the legacy you want to leave as a physician, is that others go on to carry on to make the field better than it was before, to carry it to places that I would never go. You individually are doing that. Everyone who was touched by San Diego Hospice has done that collectively. And that's something to be proud of.
Thank you very much, Dr. Von Gunten. And before we conclude, I would just like to invite everybody else to come and share their experiences that they lived through and at San Diego Hospice. Thank you very much, Dr. Von Gunten.
Thank you, Dr. Bhardwaj.